Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's press briefing. I'm Donna Bush. I'm so glad that you could be here with us on our various channels, as well as with us live on Radio Cayman. We begin today with a prayer from Pastor Dale Forbes.
Eternal God, our gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we lift up our hearts to you in praise and thanksgiving for your protection during this pandemic. Thank you, dear Lord, for the knowledge you gave our government that enabled them to implement the measures that has helped us up to this present time. Father, in your word, you encourage us to pray for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and a peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. We pray for our governor and members of government, that with wisdom and prudence, they may continue to administer their duties for the well-being of the people of these islands. I pray for the healthcare professionals, for the frontline workers who are always in the face of danger, trying to keep us safe, that you would watch over them and protect them and keep them in all their labors. Father, I pray for the people of these islands, that as they see your mercies extended, they may come to know you in a personal way through the saving grace of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. In thy name we thank you and praise you. Amen.
And thank you, Pastor Forbes. We welcome our panelists this afternoon, His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Roper, Premier the Honourable Wayne Panton, Deputy Premier the Honourable Christopher Saunders, Minister for Health and Wellness the Honourable Sabrina Turner, and Minister for Tourism and Transport the Honourable Kenneth Bryan. In studio with us are the Chief Medical Officer, the Director of the Department of Tourism, as well as members of the media and other invited guests. We go first to the Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Donna. Good afternoon to the people of the Cayman Islands who are watching on the various channels, and let me extend a hearty good afternoon as well to the ladies and gentlemen in the studio with us. Thank you for joining us for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and changes to regulations that will happen next Wednesday. The great news is that we are still in a good place with no community spread of coronavirus in the Cayman Islands. We ask the public to respond to government's challenge to take advantage of free COVID vaccines and use up the doses before they expired, and they did. Everyone who participated deserves a round of thanks. But the challenge isn't over. We still need a significant majority of people living in the Cayman Islands to get vaccinated so that we can safely reopen our borders. A new shipment of vaccine comes in today thanks to the United Kingdom government and British Airways. We remain very grateful to our mother country for ensuring that we have this supply. Those who have not been vaccinated will need to help us reach our numbers. For those who still have questions or concerns, please be guided by your doctor and the science, not the plethora of misinformation that proliferates the internet. Because we're in a good place, we're announcing today that the quarantine is being reduced to 5 days for incoming travelers who have completed an approved course of vaccination against COVID-19 that can be securely verified. For those travelers who have not been vaccinated or cannot provide satisfactory proof of vaccination, the quarantine period remains at 14 days. We're also reinstating the mandatory 72-hour pre-arrival PCR testing for the virus for all incoming travelers. But we have removed the sampling and PCR testing on arrival. The testing remains for all travelers exiting quarantine. We also plan to require mandatory weekly PCR testing of unvaccinated frontline workers. Those workers will be defined by the medical officer of health and include all those who work directly with travelers. Lastly, for now, beginning 1st July, those who quarantine at a government facility and who have taken non-essential travel will begin paying for their stay. The Minister for Health will speak more to this. As I said, these new regulations will come into effect next Wednesday. As for reopening the border, I have said before that government has been working on a plan, and we will shortly release these details in full to provide a clear, phased approach. Perhaps a working draft of these plans got into hands of the opposition, which had its own press conference yesterday, offering suggestions to reopen. To them, I say thank you, but we have this. I do regret, however, that they are politicizing an issue in respect of which the former opposition gave them a lot of latitude. It is unfortunate that the previous administration had a year or more to come up with even the basics of a reopening plan. If they had any idea about what to do, why didn't they ask the civil service team to work on a plan while they were busy attacking old friends on the campaign trail? But they didn't, and so my PAC government, since coming into office, has been working for many weeks with the civil servants and medical professionals to come up with a plan that allows us to safely reopen our borders and get our full economy moving again. I wish to thank them for all their hard work and to apologize again for the fact that they have had to give up family time and personal time, including long holiday weekends, starting in May, and in some cases, well-earned vacations, in order to work on our plans in the interest of a responsible and prudent reopening plan for the benefit of our country and our people. I found it humorous that when pressed by a reporter yesterday on why there wasn't a plan left by the last administration, the former Premier answered by not giving an answer, which is something he's a master of doing. He also said that if the opposition was in government, they would have announced a reopening date 4 weeks ago. Why did they wait until this week to speak up? I think it's because they know that we have a plan, and we're finalizing that. It has been a plan that we've been working on from scratch, and we have been doing that for the past 6 weeks. The fact is the former administration never had a reopening plan. If they had, they may have been returned to office. But they didn't, and they weren't. Our plan is based on a number of people vaccinated so that the vulnerable in our community who can't get vaccinated are protected once we do reopen our border, and we will. Under our plan, we will slowly reintroduce tourism without having thousands of people at the airport. We have too many examples of regional territories and countries who have tried and gotten it wrong, and the cost of that happening is worse than taking a bit longer to try to get it right. When we do publish our full plan in the next few weeks, it will drive confidence and allow us to realize the things that we want to see as a country and a government. Business committed to training and hiring our people and returning to stability. The truth is that we had initially planned this press conference for a week ago, but scrapped those plans when we realized that there was potentially some new medical information that we needed to clarify prior to moving forward. This reflects a responsible approach, and in fact reflects the approach that will guide how we move through the phases of our current plan. We will have to assess the best possible information to hand at every relevant point to ensure that it is safe to move to the next phase. Rather than paralysis from fear, as some might irresponsibly suggest, it is motivation from fear of getting it wrong, and the need to have the right actions at the right times to achieve the right outcomes for our people. We in my government know that the difficult steps are down the road. We want to have the same record coming out of COVID that we've had in the past year. As Premier, I feel that and carry the burden on my shoulders. I don't want to see anyone sick, but the truth is, as we reopen our borders and invite even just vaccinated people in, our risk of having COVID-19 reintroduced in the community increases. We must be prepared to face the reality that we won't avoid having some people in our community getting infected and possibly even sick. But the key to us controlling this risk and reducing the risk of anyone getting really sick or worse is through vaccine take-up and health protocols. That is why my government will continue our efforts to promote take-up. Our significant success so far has put us in a good position, and while we can be proud of that, there remains work to be done. Our plan represents a degree of safety we want to achieve. Getting us back open, though, is the hard part. The easy part is, or was, lockdown. I certainly appreciate that it took some calming of nerves to take a decision to lock down, but we know that it was the insistence of the medical community that caused government to take the lockdown position. We too use science and logic when developing our reopening plan, but we also had to take a long, hard look at the population figure being utilized by the former government. In the absence of current population census numbers, we asked the ESO to work with us to ensure the assumed number of 65,000 was as accurate as possible. This has led to a revised conclusion that there is likely around 71,100 people living in the Cayman Islands. Obviously, that impacts the vaccine take-up calculations. The latest medical advice suggests that a target ratio as high as 80% of the population may be necessary to achieve herd immunity. Using 80% of 71,100 provides a target of just under an additional 17,000 people in our population that we need to fully vaccinate. Using 70% of that population number indicates a target of just under an additional 10,000 people that need to be fully vaccinated. Whether we are aiming for the lower number or the higher number or somewhere in the middle, I think you can now understand why I say more work needs to be done around the promotion of vaccinations. To be clear, this is not about shifting goalposts or targets. It is about being a responsible government and facing the realities. We may well opt for a number within that range and even perhaps the lower end of that range, but specific determination will be made in the coming weeks once we assess the progress being made with vaccinations. Still, the challenge is clear. Government must continue its vaccine challenge, which you will hear more about from the Minister of Tourism. And today, government is launching its new communications One Step Closer vaccine campaign, which urges all residents to get one step closer to border reopening. So now a significant number of people remains to be vaccinated. We know we have a much better chance of getting there with the vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds, and also by making it a mandate that people seeking work permit renewals and grants are vaccinated. That is likely the next step. Our plan represents a phased approach that we can and must assess at every stage. We will constantly assess our circumstances and information and either proceed with or make changes to the plan. Ours is a plan that puts people over numbers. While I agree that there are many people, especially those in the tourism industry, who have been without jobs for far too long, it is incumbent on this government to ensure their safety and the safety of all residents once we reopen our borders. We will continue to support our people that are facing the greatest impacts. We also clearly recognize that businesses need to be able to survive and have the resources to ramp up for reopening. But the right balance is needed that ensures the safety of our people and the interests of the business community to survive and begin to thrive following reopening. We will do what we can to support businesses as necessary. As for training Caymanians for stayover tourism jobs, those businesses that are truly interested in the welfare of our people can assist now with training while we are safe from COVID, so that the tourism industry can successfully rebuild its capacity and be ready to be at full stride once the full reopening occurs. I thank the opposition for proposing a reopening date of the 1st of September, but the plan we will adopt and publish currently has the introduction of tourism beginning in the middle of September or in mid-September. during slow seasons so that we can restrict and manage the numbers of people to allow for the collection of data gathering and capacity building to prepare for high tourism season. A very important point is that we also specifically did not want the reopening to occur at the same time as the commencement of our school year. Opening our borders is not just a matter of picking a date out of the air, which is apparently what the opposition has done. Every move we make in our plan is calculated to get people back to our shores, to spend disposable income, to help our economy, with a view to eventually removing all quarantine for all vaccinated travelers, while still requiring unvaccinated travelers to get permission to enter our borders and abide by our rules, and to do it safely and right by our people. Our plan takes into account increasing air traffic, differing quarantines depending on the travelers, and eventually getting to a stage of all clear, hopefully by the end of the year. It is also a plan that takes into account the possibility that we may have to require masks once we let people into the country, as well as social distancing in indoor scenarios. To infer that these steps won't have to be taken is telling people what you think they want to hear, something the opposition is good at doing. They can have their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. I do commend the previous administration for getting us through lockdown and the initial reopening of the economy. Now it is time for them to let the PAC government, the people chose in April, to do the necessary cleanup work and get our country moving again in a safe and calculated manner. We have developed a reopening plan for the love of country, for the love of our people. And before I close, the former Premier, in his diatribe yesterday, mentioned that the PAC government was doing nothing and intimated that we are going to let the pension holiday deadline pass without addressing it. Nothing is further from the truth. I'm happy to confirm that my government has agreed to extend the pension holiday to the end of December. Ladies and gentlemen, the PAC government has been hard at work since being sworn in to assess the leftovers from the previous administration, right wrongs, and make necessary changes for the good of all Caymanians and those who call our shores home. We are the ones the people chose to lead the country. We will speak when we have something to say, and we won't be goaded by politics from the opposition. When it appears that we are not reacting to the antics of the opposition, you can be assured that it is a sign that we are working and working hard to make life better for those who live here and to safely open our borders with the interest of our people foremost in our minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Premier Panton. We now go to His Excellency.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be with you all again. And I'm pleased to be here to show my support for the decisions the Premier has just announced, that the first steps in a careful, cautious and phased reopening strategy. And as has come to characterise Cayman's response, these steps were all based largely on the advice of Dr. Lee, our highly respected Chief Medical Officer, who I know is keeping a very close eye on variants of concern which underline a need for caution. I'm struck by how this government, like the previous one, is taking the utmost care to safeguard the lives of everyone on these islands. Locking down took courage and bold steps at the right time were a great success, for which the previous government deserves our thanks and respect. But opening up is a quite different and more complex process, arguably even more challenging. And that is especially so for Cayman because we have enjoyed largely normal lives with no social distancing or masks for so long. And as the Premier said, almost every other country opening up has had to go backwards. That would be disastrous for Cayman for so many reasons. And a cautious, phased approach can avoid that and gradually build back our tourism sector. The absolute top priority now is to get more jabs into people's arms. And I would just like to say thank you to the Premier and his ministerial team for a wonderful effort to get increased vaccine take-up in recent weeks to ensure we did not waste any of the precious resource. On vaccine take-up, we are in a relatively good position. I mean, even based on the latest figures from the Economics and Statistics Office, 66% of the population have had at least one jab, and 56% have had both. But we do have a very long way to go. Now, the UK is supplying us with an additional 12,000 doses today on the BA flight, and we will be able to secure more. But we do need people to come forward and use those doses that are being sent today. And I am very pleased that we've taken the decision to vaccinate children aged 12 and above, because that is a very sensible decision for us in Cayman, given that very few of our young people have been exposed to the virus, and so we'll need this added protection. But we do need to vaccinate a significant number of additional people if we're going to get within that range of 70 to 80% of the population vaccinated. But that prize is within our grasp. And we all need to recognise that vaccines are working incredibly well, far better than the scientists dared hope. And the data from the UK is abundantly clear. Vaccines stop you getting seriously ill or dying, but they do not stop COVID circulating, risking you catching it if not vaccinated. On Monday, Public Health England issued a press release on the efficiency or efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine against what's known as the Delta variant, which is spreading rapidly through the UK at the moment. The excellent news is that if you have had both doses of the Pfizer vaccine, it is 96% effective in preventing hospitalizations, which is a quite incredible figure. So please do come forward and take both jabs as soon as you can. It really is the best way to stay safe. For those of you hoping to travel to the UK this summer, we have been trying very hard to get Cayman added to the green list, meaning that you would not need to quarantine on arrival. Our strong vaccination record, lack of community transmission, as well as our new genomic sequencing capability, which allows us to detect all variants of the virus, should stand us in good stead. But as with all these things, these decisions can be affected by the domestic situation. And as you know, a full relaxation of COVID restrictions in England has been put back from 21 June to give the vaccination programme there a few more weeks to take effect. So even though people travelling from here are highly unlikely to pose any kind of health threat to the UK, the British government may decide not to add additional countries to the green list at this time. And I know that is frustrating because we all believe Cayman should be green. We will continue to make that case, but I do think the genomic sequencing capacity is a significant change from last time. So we have a lot to be proud of in our COVID response, and I just want to say a thank you to the Civil Service Programme Board, chaired very ably by our Deputy Governor, for preparing fully considered and comprehensive advice to ministers, and to Travel Cayman for their continued excellent management of the evacuation flights and persons in quarantine. We are now on a path to reopen the border. To help that effort, the whole community needs to rally around a renewed effort to get more jabs into arms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Deputy Premier Saunders.
Thank you very much, Donna. And good afternoon to the listening public. I just want to take a brief moment just to kind of provide an update as to where we are with government finances for the first 5 months. Now, I just want to make a note that the numbers I'll be focusing on today will be, The number I'll be focusing on today will be those of central government. We're still trying to bottom out the numbers for the SAGCs, which is the statutory authorities and government-owned companies, because there seems to be a little lag in their reporting. But what I can report to the Caymanian people so far is that for the first 5 months of the year, we're looking at an operating surplus of approximately $175 million, which is $18 million or 11% better than a budget of $157 million. I want to note that this position that we are at the end of May is actually $75 million better than where we were for the first 5 months of 2020, where we had an operating surplus of $100 million. We achieved this operating surplus by having total operating revenues of $525.5 million, which was $43.5 million, or 9% better than budget of $482 million, and was also, again, as I mentioned, $100 million better than for the same period in 2020. Our total operating expenses for the first 5 months in central government was just under $351 million. Unfortunately, this was 8%, or $25.5 million over budget, and also $43 million more than the $208 million that we spent in the same period in 2020. So just in short, our revenues are doing better than we did last year by $100 million, but our expenses are also up from the same period last year. Now, our bank balances at the end of May was just under $571 million, so we're still very cash healthy from that standpoint. Now, collectively, our SAGCs, which is our statutory authority, and government-owned companies, such as statutory authorities like Cayman Islands Airport Authority, Civil Aviation Authority, and so forth, or government-owned companies like Cayman Airways and Turtle Center, collectively, they are running a deficit. And that is expected because a lot of them are basically heavily dependent on our tourism sector being vibrant. What I can say is that we are definitely watching our cash very, very closely. And that's one of the reasons why we don't want to do anything crazy at this point, because for most of those SAGCs, we would probably be the lender of last resort in terms of making sure that they can pay salaries and everything else, which is one of the things that is very important to this government, that everyone who is a public servant know that they're still getting a paycheck at the end of the month to keep their families and everyone going. What I also just want to touch on, and this is very important, is that if you look at last year, for example, for the first 5 months, the government had an operating surplus of $100 million. But then, for the last 7 months of the year, the government ran a deficit of $190 million to actually finish last year, central government, with a $90 million deficit. So it is important for us, especially in the latter part of the years, that we actually have the cash on hand to basically make sure that we can meet any demands that pops up. Now, even right now, while we are at $175 million surplus, for the last 2 months, we have actually had a deficit of roughly $23.5 million, which is averaging roughly around $11.7 million per month for the last 2 months. Now, this is actually down from the $27 million on a month average that we were last year. So last year, for the last 7 months, the government was averaging around $27 million deficit, whereas right now we're actually averaging $11.7 million deficit as we come out of the first quarter, where we made a lot of money from the financial services from those fees coming in. One of the things, though, I just want to touch on is that when this government came into office, the last budget that the previous government left for us, which was a pre-election budget, estimated that government would have had a deficit across all sectors of $157 million. They expected that core government, central government that is, would have had a deficit of $98 million, and they forecasted that the SAGCs would have had a deficit of $59 million, which would have given us a total government deficit of $157 million for this year. What has made this more challenging is that we found out afterwards that the tourism stipend, which is running at around a little over $5 million a month, was not budgeted past the month of May. So in essence, the government forecasted that there would have been no stipend payments for tourism past the month of May. Had we turned around and included that at least $35 million, we're talking about now an entire government deficit for this year of $192 million. And also, the $2,000 that was actually promised on the campaign trail to increase it by from $1,500 to $2,000 per month, had the government go that route and included that in the forecast, then the deficit for this year would have been over $200 million based on what it was that they were forecasting. Now, we recognize that we are still living in challenging times, and we are going through the operating budget and trying to get the SPS and everything finalized. And one of the most important things for us is to make sure that, one, we keep our expenses low as possible. Many civil servants, many public servants are working very hard despite several vacancies just to achieve what it is that we have today. So this is not very easy. At the same time, we need to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to also help the many people, or continue to help the many people in the tourism sector that is actually still meeting challenges as a result of the tourism sector being closed. Now, we also have to be mindful that we are in hurricane season, and there is also an active hurricane season plan. Again, we need to make sure that we have resources on hand to make sure that we can meet any challenges that the country may face. Now, there are certain luxuries that the opposition have, and I can tell you, I've been there for the last 4 years, that you don't have the same luxuries on this side. At this side right now, decisions that we make actually have life and death situations. When we talk about the getting herd immunity of 70 to 80%, we also have to think about the other 20 to 30% that is not vaccinated. That 20 or 30% are largely made up of our children. We cannot just sit back and open the gate as is when we have a lot of children under the age of 12, thousands of children, also their parents, unvaccinated. These are the type of decisions that we have to deal with as a government. Now, it's very easy, like I said, coming from that side, and I do appreciate, but at the same time, I'm a little bit disappointed, and the reason being is that when we were in opposition and many business people could not get their way, and with the government, and I give the government credit where credit was due, where they stood firm, many of those business people called us in opposition, and our response was simple. The government has information, and we're going to have the one-voice approach in this pandemic. We're not going to politicize it. And it's just rather ironic that the same government who started the policy of putting people over profits have now basically started to cave to the cry of the business community. We get the same cries, we get the same complaints, and we do understand. But at the same time, we can always rebuild our economy. We cannot rebuild lives. We have yet to have attended a COVID funeral, and we very much like for it to stay that way. So with that said, and we are, like I say, watching our finances closely, and I really want to thank the thousands of public servants who have rised up, meet the challenges, and have allowed our finances to remain strong. And that's one of the things that we definitely need to go, especially as we go through the rest of this pandemic, and also as we go through hurricane season. Because we have got to be mindful that that is also something out there that we have to deal with. I just want to touch on one thing as also the minister responsible for labor. Opening up the economy requires also bringing back a lot of foreign workers. We have got to be realistic and realize that we also do have a housing shortage as it stands right now. I mean, just about every single condo or every single room in this island is actually full one way or the other. And that's one of the things that led us to sit with ESO to try to get the population number revised up in terms of to see what the true population is. Because we are hearing the same thing. We see the traffic, we see the activity, and we sit back and we're like, there's no way this population could have been 65,000, especially considering that in 2019 it was close to 70,000. So we're already seeing the domestic activity. So as we start to open back up the economy, we need to start consider the housing issue that we have. We also have to consider that many properties now that are part of the rental pool may go back to the Airbnb market also. That again will also compound the challenges that we may have. So there's also the social aspect and the infrastructure aspect that we have to look at. We're also mindful that many of our people who are receiving the stipends are not applying for jobs at this time. And that's one of the reasons why we want to push a jobs drive to start to encourage them, because businesses will need time to train up people and everything else. But I will leave the Minister of Tourism to speak about that also. But in closing, I just want to say that this is the holistic view that we're looking at from the entire economy. It's not just turning a switch on and just flying the gates open. this is something that has to be done responsibly. We have achieved a lot from many sacrifices, and I thank everyone who called the Cayman Islands home for the sacrifices that they have made to allow us to reach where we have reached. But we cannot at this point right now turn around and just throw the switch open. We've seen what happened to St. Kitts. At one point, they were being hailed as the model to follow. Now they're back in lockdown. And as the governor said, just about every single country that has reopened has gone back into lockdown. We do not want the Cayman Islands to become that statistic also. And that's the reason I want to thank the Premier and all my colleagues who have spent countless hours, much away from their own families, to really and truly work for what it is that we are developing. And all I can say is just continue to watch this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Premier Saunders. We now go to the Minister for Health, the Honourable Sabrina Turner.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It is my pleasure to be here with you, and today we are pleased, and as alluded to earlier on by our Premier, the changes in regulations that will take into effect as of June 23rd, which I'll go a little bit more in detail. As previously stated, the reduction of quarantine for a period of 5 days for incoming travellers who have completed an approved course of vaccination against COVID-19 disease at least 2 weeks before travelling to the Cayman Islands, and of one of the approved vaccinations as provided by the Chief Medical Officer. Please note that the quarantine period for unvaccinated travellers will remain at 14 days. Vaccinated travellers whose vaccinations cannot be securely verified will have to quarantine for 14 days. Now, reinstating a mandatory 72-hour pre-arrival PCR testing for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, for all incoming travellers, irrespective of their vaccination status prior to arrival in the Cayman Islands. The removal of sampling and PCR testing for SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19 on arrival for all incoming travellers. PCR testing for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, to remain for all travellers exiting, and the requirement for mandatory weekly nasopharyngeal sampling and PCR testing for unvaccinated frontline workers for SARS-CoV-2. These will be defined in a list provided by the Medical Officer of Health and will include all of those working directly with travellers, such as Customs and Border Control officers, airline staff, Owen Roberts International Airport, and other port workers elsewhere, port security staff, Travel Cayman customer-facing operatives, and those assisting with compliance, staff working in government quarantine facilities, including cleaners and those providing transport. Additional changes to regulations, which will be in effect as of July 1st, will require travellers to meet the cost of their quarantine if quarantining in a government-run or designated quarantine facility for all non-essential travel. Essential travel being defined as travel for medical reasons with an approved doctor's referral letter, or travel for approved government business, or students enrolled in an educational facilities who are attending classes overseas with requisite proof. Therefore, exceptions to payment for government-run designated quarantine facilities for educational purposes shall only extend to returning students or parents, guardians returning from taking students under the age of 22 to an overseas enrolled educational institution, and that's with requisite proof. I know that reducing the quarantine measures is something many have been hoping for, but I do want to implore on our community who are vaccine eligible and who have not yet received their vaccines to please make every effort to do so once they're available, and that's starting as of tomorrow for second dose only at Owen Roberts International Airport, and that'll be going on for the first 3 days. I would also like to wish for the public to note that the estimate of population, which has been stated here today, and this is based on updated information from the ESO, is 71,106 persons. Previous number that we're working with of 65,000 was as per the 2010 census. And based on these estimates, 46,911 persons having received at least one dose equates to 66% of our population. 39,852 persons with 2 doses equates to 56% of our population. I want to again publicly thank the Health Services Authority and Public Health for coming together and working efficiently, calmly, and effectively to manage our vaccination program. It has been such a magnificent feat, but with such resounding positive results. Thank you all for our hardworking professionals. You have once again proven to be world class. Also, I would like to announce today the extension of the health insurance premiums payment assistance program for a further 3 months. The current program ends on June 30th, so this program will be extended to September 30th, 2021. Interested persons have until June 23rd to apply, if in need of assistance from July 1st. We are requesting that all persons reapply as circumstances may have changed. Applications should be made through the Health Insurance Commission, and persons may contact the Health Insurance Commission via email to hic@gov.ky or by phone 946-2084 for additional details about the program or to obtain an application form. Finally, I want to thank and encourage our community to continue to work together to keep our island safe. None of this success is possible without all of you. The health and safety of our islands remain our top priority for our government, and I can assure you, as Minister for Health and Wellness, we will do everything in our power to put our people's safety first. Let's keep working together, and we all do our part to be safe. God bless.
Thank you very much, Minister Turner. We now go to the Minister for Tourism, the Honourable Kenneth Bryan.
And thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to hear the government's update on some of the most pressing issues impacting our citizens and our country at this time. You may hear a little bit of repetition, but repetition is good for emphasis. Contrary to what the members of the opposition would like the public to believe, the PAC administration has been consistently working on a broad spectrum of issues which impact the quality of life for our people. Finalizing the plans to safely reopen our borders is just one of the many subject areas that we have devoted a great deal of time and attention to, because our goal is not only to get it right, but to get it right the first time. The last thing that we want, or any one of us wants, is the risk of another lockdown, or potentially worse, death. From the Ministry of Tourism's perspective, the majority of the current activities have been focused on things either related to the border reopening plans or related to the issues created by the border closure. In recent weeks, members of our senior leadership team and I have held meetings with a variety of key tourism stakeholders to discuss the matters pertaining to their respective sectors or to our tourism industry. For example, we have met with the representatives of the Cayman Islands Tourism Association, better known as CITA, to discuss their plans and logistics in preparation for reopening, given that the interest of our Caymanian people must remain at the top priority. During these meetings, the ministry has underscored that to our tourism partners, the government operates on a Caymanian first basis, and we expect that every effort be made to ensure that Caymanians are replaced and reabsorbed back into the workforce before any recruitment strategies for outside persons are entertained. In recent weeks, I've also met with representatives from the Land and Sea Co-op, Caymanian Water Sports Association, and the Cayman Islands Independent Tour Bus Association, and Caymanian Hospitality Ambassadors, among others. The focus of these meetings was to discuss their contribution to the tourism industry, as well as the challenges they are currently facing, with a view to resolving some of the most pressing requests and concerns. Several of the players within the tourism industry have asked for the government's assistance to help them prepare their assets and their businesses for reopening. In some instances, we have been presented with the proposals which are under, some of those proposals are currently under consideration. But in the meantime, I'm happy to announce that the requests which the government has already considered have been approved. These are the continuation of the Stingray Feeding and Interaction Program, which has been extended for another 3 months. I've found the necessary monies within the Ministry of Tourism's budget. The moratorium on the granting of the Wildlife Interaction Zone licensing, better known as the WIZ, has also been extended for another 3 months to protect those in the industry during these challenging times. The moratorium will be revised again in due course once the tourism industry has stabilized. I would like now to turn my attention to the tourism stipend, and I can confirm that the payments for the months of June are currently being processed by my ministry. Though I have announced this previously, it bears repeating that the Ministry of Tourism will be extending the stipend program for another 4 months. That is from July to October, with payments at the full amount of $1,500. Government remains cautiously optimistic that our borders will have been reopened by the end of October, which will allow the displaced workers to re-enter the workforce. The stipend will therefore be reduced to $750 for the months of November and December, because the stipend recipients should, by that time, be back to work with alternative sources of income. I'd also like to state that while Cabinet has approved the continuation of the payments for the next months, the next 4 months, and the month of November and December, I'm also required to secure the approval from Parliament before the actual payments for July to be dispersed. From my ministry end, we will do everything within our power to process the payments on time, but please bear with us if the month of July payment is delayed as a result of having to go through the parliamentary process. While I'm on the topic of stipend, I would like to announce that the ministry will be issuing a survey that we're asking all stipend recipients to complete to help us gather the necessary information and data to make informed decisions going forward in relations to work. The survey will be mandatory because the information we're seeking to collect will identify things like how many of our displaced workers are fully unemployed, how many wish to return back to the industry versus how many of them have moved on to new opportunities. It will also tell us how many persons work in the cruise sector versus the stayover. The ministry's goal is to ensure that all tourism and hospitality workers who have been affected by the pandemic and who wish to return to the tourism industry are given the first preference to fill all vacancies. The survey will therefore serve as an important tool for holding the industry accountable for ensuring the skills are being suitably matched up to available jobs. I want to stress that this survey is mandatory because it's the best way for us to help you get back to work. And truthful responses are necessary. Be honest. Tell us if you are working or not. It won't affect you receiving your stipend. We just need to know exactly what we are dealing with so we can make the best decisions on the people's behalf. Within the next week, my ministry will provide the further details on how the survey will be completed, so please look out for the press releases and bulletin containing that information. With respect to cruise lines, I've spoken to the president of FCCA, as well as the representatives from many of the other cruise lines, to get a deeper understanding of their safety protocols while we go forward. These meetings also allowed us to discuss the health and safety standards that they would have to meet in order for their ships to return back to the Cayman Islands. The cruise lines are currently facing significant difficulties with respect to mandating that all their passengers must be vaccinated. While they try to iron out these difficulties with the various authorities and regulatory authorities, I don't foresee any cruise ships coming to the Cayman Islands, at least for the remainder of this year. The cruise lines will be running some test cruises in the near future, and the ministry will be paying close attention observing the outcomes. While we recognize the contribution that the cruise industry makes to Cayman Islands economy, we look forward to welcoming the cruise ships back to our shores in the future. The cruise lines have not yet demonstrated that they can meet the strict safety protocols this government expects. While we continue to keep the lines of communication open with the ministry and the cruise lines, we will continue to provide further updates to the public as to when the situation regarding the cruise lines changes. The final subject I want to speak on briefly about is the vaccine challenge. Many of you may recall that the challenge was launched because at the time there were concerns of the supply of vaccines would expire before they were used. I am pleased to report that the challenge, which ran from the 8th of May to the 9th of June, proved to be an outstanding success, with 14,375 people were vaccinated within 1 month period. And all of our vaccines were used, as you heard His Excellency the Governor had said, before the expiration deadline. Everyone who was vaccinated during those dates have had a chance to win a prize, and a draw to select the winners will take place this Friday, the 18th of June, between the hours of 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. at Caymanian-owned Cayman Cabana, located on the waterfront in Georgetown. This event is open to the public, and we have over 100 prizes to give away. So I hope that many of the people who got vaccinated will join myself and my colleagues on Friday for the draw, as Ms. Cayman will be doing the drawing. I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank all the businesses and entities and individuals that generously donated the prizes to help ensure that our precious vaccines did not go to waste. Trust me, without your help, I don't think we would have made the mark, and many of those vaccines that are lifesavers would have gone to waste. So again, on behalf of the PAC government, thank you so much. When I launched the vaccine challenge, government was still working on the assumption that our population was 65,000. But as we've heard from the Honourable Premier, Honourable Deputy Premier, and the Minister of Health and Wellness, the true figure is actually 71,100, and an increase of over 6,000 more people. This means that we're not as far ahead with our vaccine programs as we thought we were. Using the revised figures, we're now only 66%, or 46,928 of the population have had at least one dose of the vaccine, and 55%, or 39,090 people, have completed 2 doses. What this is telling us is that we still have quite a ways to go before we achieve the acceptable figure that will allow the government to confidently set the date to reopen our borders. As a responsible, people-centric government, we cannot provide approval to open the country's borders until we can be confident that our people are significantly protected. And so, faced with the new reality, I will be launching a new, bigger, and bolder challenge that I'm hoping that will provide a stronger second push to get us across the finish line with respect to the vaccination percentages. For the next vaccine challenge, I intend to raise $100,000 in cash, which will be divided up and given away at a draw 2 weeks after we have achieved the 80% target. Everyone who has been fully vaccinated and is either Caymanian, permanent resident, or work permit holder will have a chance to win. Unfortunately, for those who may have been on vacation or just visiting, you will not be allowed within this draw. I'm sure that the Cayman Islands has some of the best corporate citizens in the world. And I know that we are also fortunate to have a successful financial services industry. Given that we are the wealthiest country in the Caribbean region, I'm taking a bigger and bolder step, and I'm seeking to raise that $100,000 through donations from the larger businesses, corporations, law firms, accounting firms, real estate agents, and property developers, hotels, and the like. We hope, who have not already contributed to the first vaccine challenge. And I'm sure the only reason that they held back from donating to the first one because they were waiting for the second challenge. I realize that this is a significant sum of money, but I firmly believe that with the collaboration and cooperation, it can be obtained. If 20 good corporate citizens or wealthy individuals just gave $5,000 each, we can easily reach the goal. So I'm waiting to hear from you. The reality is, whether you operate within the tourism sector or not, we all have a vested interest in seeing our borders reopened. And so I'm urging the businesses who can afford it to please make a contribution of $5,000 or more to this new enhanced vaccine challenge initiative. To pledge your contribution, please email mottvax@caymanislands.ky, and that's mottvax@caymanislands.ky. Or call our ministry at 244-1259. That is 244-1259. Just before closing, I would like to remind the public that until borders reopen, the only flights to and from Cayman are repatriation flights, which should be used for urgent travel situations only. It is not yet business as usual. While I understand that people have many reasons for wanting to travel overseas, like a good break from all this chaos, I understand. Please be mindful that our borders are still closed. Flights are availability will remain limited. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bryan. I'd like to now call on the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. John Lee, for some numbers and information.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll try and be as brief as possible. It is now 340 days since our last community transmission of SARS-CoV-2, and we're 90 minutes away from getting our next 12,000 doses of vaccine to contribute to our very successful program to date. Although the population being restated by the Economics and Statistics Office is disappointing in some way, meaning that we have more work to do, nevertheless, we're still doing very well at 66% of the population having had their first dose of the vaccine. And for that first dose to get to 80%, it will require only an additional 10,000 people, although to completely and fully vaccinate people, it will require an additional 17,000 people to be vaccinated. The other additional information from the restating of the figures is that the population proportions have been adjusted somewhat, so I'll go through them in the different age categories according to the people that have been vaccinated. So for those 12 to 16, we vaccinated 8.5%, 16 to 30, 66%, 30 to 40, 74%, 40 to 50, 80%, 50 to 60, 84%, and over 60 at 87%. Those figures are now up to date because of the gap in vaccinations. We've been able to get all the forms into the database, and those proportions are currently as good as we know them. I think that it's very good news that not only have we vaccination being rolled out across the world, which will have a good effect on the amount of infections that we see, but also there are further treatments coming along, and the treatment that Donald Trump had, but experimentally, but clearly a success for him in treating COVID, has now been approved following a large trial and reduces deaths in people by up to 20%. So not only on the prevention, but also on the treatment front, more things are developing all the time. think that's really it for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lee. We'd like to begin calling on members of the media, beginning with Mr. Ralph Lewis from the Caymanian Times.
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon, members of the panel. Thank you for your very your contributions, and I thank the Minister for Tourism for clarifying the designation of repatriation flights, which have affected some of our travel plans. So thank you for answering that question. I'll now address the Premier.
Yes.
Premier, you mentioned that there may be a change in the future of making it mandatory for work permit holders to have vaccines or to remain in the island. Can you say what would happen if they refuse to have it?
Sorry, repeat that.
You mentioned earlier that there may be a classification of a mandatory requirement for work permit holders to have vaccinations to remain on the island. And if someone refuses to take the vaccination, would they have to leave the island, or they can make other arrangements?
So if we're talking about mandatory vaccinations on a renewal of a work permit or in the grant of a work permit, if that isn't supplied, it would be the same as somebody refusing to, for example, submit the normal medical tests that are required by the existing regulations. So it would mean that their work permit wouldn't be processed.
Okay. And when will we hear that decision?
I think that is something that we will be addressing in the coming weeks. It might be 2 weeks from now, it might be 3 weeks from now. Yeah, so it is something that's actively under consideration at this point. We have had the government legal department have a look at it, and I think they are happy with it. I think you will remember, and other members of the press will remember that we had a situation where the Turks and Caicos basically took the very strident position that all people on work permits had to have the vaccination. That's not the position we are taking. We're saying if you have to renew your work permit, or if you are going to apply for a new work permit, you need to provide this data, this confirmation. In the case of what we're proposing, it seems clear from the legal position that we are on solid ground in doing that. We're not breaching anyone's human rights, and we're not being disproportionate or unreasonable.
My next question is, there's a saying that the race is not for the swift, but those who can endure. Is that the position that the PAC government has taken in regards to their future plans in trying to open up the borders? And if so, can you assure the country that the PAC government or the government will make sure that we can endure whatever challenges that may face?
Thank you. Well, of course, we're trying to, ensure that we strike the right balance. Would we like to be very swift and get to make up this 18,000 in vaccinations? Yes, but Dr. John Lee has just confirmed that we're getting a new supply. I think he mentioned 90 minutes. And Governor Roper mentioned the amount of 12,000 doses. So that's not going to be enough to get us to that number. Would we like to get there very quickly? Yes, because it would change the options that we're considering. But the reality is we have to look at the facts and look at the realities that we're dealing with and balance all the interests and plan on that basis so that we can provide a rational and reasonable approach, which provides people confidence. The people of our country as well as the businesses of our country. I think we can confidently say that where we're at now, where we're proposing to go forward with our plan, will instill that confidence.
I have one more question before I make way to my colleagues behind me. There's significant pressure coming from the business sector to open the borders. That happened previously.
Yes.
And there were some responses that remember that it's people before profit. There's some indication that some business may close down in the near future and their employees may not have jobs. What will you say to those business owners who sought to put pressure on you and your government to open the border?
Well, I mean, I think we certainly have to bear in mind the realities of the businesses. As I've said in my remarks, we don't want to get things wrong. We want to try to ensure that when we are ready to go, that the businesses are able to ramp up and sort of hit the ground running. It is not something that we are unaware of in terms of the challenges that businesses are facing. But we can't, if we get it wrong and we end up having to go backwards as other countries have done, then that will be the end of those businesses likely. What I'm hearing from a lot of them is that they would rather wait until we get it right so that they can use what resources they have available to them to ramp up and move forward in a positive manner without having the risk of us having to go backwards. It's as I said, we understand the challenges. I mean, the Deputy Premier mentioned the calls being made to the opposition last year during lockdown. Well, it wasn't just the opposition that was getting calls at that. People like myself that had been involved with government and that particular government previously were getting the same calls. The same pressure is brought to bear. I was being told, you need to influence the current premier. I said, no, I think they're taking the right approach. I think in this case, we are taking the right approach as well. I think we're being responsible and we're trying to get the balance right so that we can get there as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible.
Thank you,
Mr. Rav, if I can just add a little bit, because the businesses that you probably are referring to are mainly in the tourism industry. I like the Honourable Premier has said, basically there's no perfect way to do this, and somebody will be affected in some way. I've seen the articles of concern that this first stage potentially could cause persons to want to travel as shorter period of quarantine. But this stage is essential because these stages also operate as a monitoring process as we move forward, how we're going to slowly open. So there's a key part to the first stages, so we can't avoid it. But I just want to encourage the public that if you can bear in mind that the flights are for repatriation purposes, they're only really for emergencies or for education purposes. And as much as I know you want to go and travel, try to see if you can hold back on that for a little while, because your contributions to going to the local restaurants are keeping them alive until we have found the formula to reopen where we can replace the local customers with good, strong tourists that will spend their money in our economy. You are keeping them alive and they depend on you, but this is an important process. So if you can hold back on that vacation right now until we get the borders open, it would be great to help those industries.
Thank you, sir.
And if you have to get off the rock, there's Cayman Brack and Little Cayman, lovely places.
All right, thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis. Now we'd like to call on Wendy from CNS.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Can I just clarify? 12,000. You said it's difficult to hear at the back.
Yeah, it's about,
Doses.
I think it's 11,700. 12,000 was round.
So
they come in 2 boxes, so we're getting 2 boxes, which is 11,000 doses.
So we're going to need more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So has that order been placed?
No,
Are you?
not at the moment. I mean, we obviously we had a big challenge to use what we had originally, so we want to see again that those 12,000 doses will be used, but we can get more and get more quickly. But we will order more as soon as we see that people do come forward in the many thousands that we need to achieve those targets.
Okay, thank you. the population figures which have thrown everything out seem pretty wrong. 6,000 people. Those figures came because I remember asking quite a few questions during the lockdown period about where those figures came from, and I think somebody mentioned it coming from the census. In actual fact, that we were told by civil servants as well that these figures were based on an estimate in 2019 of there being around 70,000 people on island. Ken's looking at me, I know, because Minister Brian is looking at me because I think he remembers. The estimate was based on the population being around 70,000 in 2019, which was an ESO figure. Then they calculated the people who left and the people who came back during that period of lockdown, which got us to about 65,000. Do you have any inclination as to how this has gone so wrong?
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
No, what happened was this. When we looked at the overall activity and also receiving reports from, I guess, some retailers that some of the retail activities were at pre-COVID level, we wanted to take a look back at the population. And one of the things, just to put things in context, is that the labor force survey outside of a census year is one of the things that actually drive the population count that we have. Where it's missing is the long-term residents. So there are people who come on island, spend 3-4 months at a time, spurts in, spurts out. They wouldn't count as long-term residents because they're not here over a period of 6 months to qualify. But nonetheless, they've basically been here, especially during COVID. So one of the things that actually started this conversation is that we took the 2010 census number, if memory serves me right, was 55,036. We went and we added every single international arrival. We subtracted every international departure. We added all the births, we minus all the deaths, just to kind of have an idea of where we think the resident population would be, because there are a lot of tourists on island. And one of the things why this was important for us is that the difference even between 65 and 70,000 or 5,000, if you're targeting an 80% vaccination rate, that's 4,000. And like we said, this is a life and death situation or life and death decision that we're actually making. So when we start doing our own internal analysis, we decided that we needed to expand the normal definition of what a population is to include the long-term residents who normally wouldn't be counted as part of the process. Because we have actually, from trips at the airport, we're actually seeing that a lot of long-term residents who are quote-unquote just passing through are also being vaccinated. So we wanted to make sure then, from a count standpoint, that we had the maximum amount of number. So just be better to be on that safe side than to have done something different. And so that's really where it came from. So it is not to take anything from ESO, but to recognize that we do have a long-term resident market. The homes in Cayman are full, the condos are full, so the people are here. And since they're being vaccinated, then we think it's important for us to at least recognize them inside this count as opposed to the normal route that we would go. So that's really what triggered it.
Okay. Thank you. When we're talking about a vaccine verification for this 5-day quarantine, are you talking about accepting all international vaccines that are verifiable? So vaccines administered in the UK, administered in the US, or just people who've been vaccinated here?
Dr. Lee.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Wendy.
Sorry,
This is rather a complex issue to answer. Complex in the sense that there's a lot of technical bits behind it. The world is moving towards certain standards with regards verifying vaccines, and a lot of these involve essentially technological solutions to look at private and public keys which lock the data to prevent forgeries from being presented. So that's the most important thing. We want to be assured that somebody is vaccinated with an approved vaccine. Some countries are already producing this. You'll be aware that the EU has a solution. You'll be aware that the UK has a solution in the NHS. The US are on the verge of having a solution, and Apple has already indicated its preferred technology for the solution. The only reason I'm saying Apple is it's an indication that the industry is likely to go down that way, because if a large technology firm chooses something, it's likely to be adopted in a quite widespread way. The International Civil Aviation Organization also is looking at a solution. So there are a number of different organizations which are all looking to do principally the same thing. Cayman needs to do two things. It needs to be able to check people who are arriving. It also needs to give its citizens the evidence so that when they travel, they will also have the evidence to evidence their vaccination status. And we're looking at both sides of that picture. We are asking the UK for some help with some of these issues, because there's absolutely no point us reinventing the wheel for them. As far as Cayman, people who've been vaccinated in Cayman demonstrating to the world, we are looking to Cerner, who is the HSA's hospital information system provider, to work through them and through the organizations they're working with, so that anybody vaccinated here will be able to evidence when they travel abroad. But whether it be an app or a piece of paper, they essentially will have the same thing, which is a QR code that will have the security built into it. It's nearly a real-time check on that vaccination or PCR test status, which can be verified by anybody who has the appropriate kit on the other side to look at that piece of paper or that app.
So you're going to be able to do all this within 2 weeks?
There are some of the technologies that already exist, so the NHS already has it. As far as the people vaccinated in Cayman are concerned, we have a method of checking that now, because we have a database with everybody. Yeah. So from two of the sources, we already have it. I read an email thread the other day stating that a lot of American companies, including people like the pharmacies and something, are all looking to implement it imminently. So that will be coming. We will not be able to implement the ability to read it immediately. It will take a matter of weeks. I don't know how many weeks, but we're absolutely certain we want to prevent any risk of fraudulent vaccination certificates from getting into the country, because they represent a real public health risk to us.
Okay, lovely. That'll help explain. The Premier, you mentioned doing something in mid-September as a sort of early rollout towards borders. So if the borders are opening, anticipated sometime in late October, but you talked about something happening in the middle of September. What are you talking about there? Like some kind of easing of some tourists being allowed to come? Like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, that was just a reference to a part of the plan that we have worked on, which sets mid-September as the sort of start date when there's more of a relaxation on the border requirements, which does allow some tourists to come in who are fully vaccinated.
Would that also begin to see that? Would that be where we would begin to see commercial flights invited back?
Yes, I think we would see more commercial flights at that point. I mean, it's once we announce what the plan is, I'm guessing that, and the Minister for Tourism may want to speak more on it. But once we do that, I'm guessing that the international airlines under the Open Skies Agreement will look to start booking their routes coming into Cayman.
Okay.
It's difficult to say which and how many would do that.
But it's around about that time you would start to discuss that with airlines. Okay. The other thing is, what's the motivation behind the idea of dropping the test for when people get here and bringing back the pre-test? Like, can you explain why you've moved onto that mode?
It's just to secure ourselves that knowing persons will not be able to board a flight, being positive and understanding there are different variants of concern that are out there. And as we enter into the various phase approach, as we embark on reopening, the volumes may be a little bit much to undertake locally.
Okay.
And if I can just assist the Minister in respect to this, from an airport's perspective, it makes it become more difficult. As you know, there's expectations that a lot of people are going to want to come. And if everybody is required to do the test at the airport, it's going to become more difficult. And the fact that they have to get an exit test, they will always be in a controlled environment. So even if they're tested or if they're positive when they land, they're still going to go into quarantine regardless. So it saves us some money, saves us some space, and it's more convenient for the passenger to enjoy in the event that they are not positive.
Glad you mentioned money. How much will it cost to go into government quarantine for 14 days?
The regulations previously, I think, and please, I stand to be corrected, it's something like $2,600, but I stand to be corrected.
That's for 14 days,
Yes,
not 5.
for the whole, yes. So we're working on all of that again.
And just to clarify, because I know this is going to come up,
Yes.
Teachers who are going to be travelling over the summer and then will be coming back August, September, will that be considered now? Because some of them have already booked flights to go, because obviously the schools are gone in a couple of weeks, so some of them already are planning on leaving on the British Airways flights or on the flights to Miami. Are we going to be charging them when they come back?
Well, as we said, as essential travel.
Education.
It's education purposes. Now, for holiday, that is a fine line. We're flirting with a lot of stuff there. And we're really trying to discourage as much as inviting as it can be for vacation purposes. But that is something I'm quite sure that we'd be willing to entertain and look closer in the coming days, understanding that previous or prior arrangements must be made.
Okay.
Considering who they work with, it is definitely something that we looked at very seriously.
Definitely.
We'll make accommodations.
Yes.
I was just going to say, because I know that it's one of the problems of retaining staff to make sure that they actually come back.
Yes.
So,
We don't want to do that.
We're going to have to move it along a little bit.
okay, sorry, I didn't realise. Sorry, you've put me under pressure. I'm under pressure. I think I've only got one more, actually. Oh, yes. You spoke about, the Premier spoke about, and I think Mr. Saunders spoke about, that you've been, the criticisms that you receive from the other guys, but that you've been righting wrongs. Can you be a bit more specific about some of the wrongs that you've been righting?
Well, you can start with the stipend. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's rather the height of political hypocrisy that you go out and you campaign about raising the stipend from $1,500 to $2,000 per month. But you didn't even put it in the budget, past me. So if they were returned as a government, what were the plans? Because they actually did not include that inside their forecast. So, I mean, one of the things that I do recognize, and there is a temptation, and as I said to my colleagues, I no disrespect, but the last time these guys were in opposition between 2009 and 2012, they were ruthless and they were relentless, and they didn't support one thing that the government of the day did. So are we expecting anything different? The answer is absolutely not. I must say, though, that I thought that they would have at least extended the courtesy of not trying to politicize this issue. And like I said, we got many complaints from business people. And our policy, which we supported then, was one, there'll be one voice on this issue, as not to politicize it. We saw what happened in countries where it became political. People didn't want to get vaccine. People denied many of the sciences and all that. We didn't want that here. And I'm a little bit disappointed that they chose now to move away from the policy of putting people over profits to now just being driven by the business community. And I understand that, but they are where they are simply because, one, they listen to the businesses and not the people that they were elected to represent, and that's the God's honest truth.
Any more?
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much. Reshma from the Compass.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So I want to take that last point first. That wasn't how I had planned my schedule, but so Mr. Saunders, when are we going to get your plan for expenditures and so forth for government, the SPS?
Actually, that's actually going to be tabled in the Legislative Assembly next month. What I can say is that we have completed the first round already of numbers. We are pushing back on some of the numbers that have been submitted for the simple fact that, one, some of the numbers are pretty much way out there. And then two, as I said before, we want to make sure that we take a very tight approach, a very conservative approach in terms of trying to make government finances be in a position to help those who remain vulnerable. What I can say, just even over the lunch break earlier, I was having a side conversation with the deputy governor. And when I do recognize that what we inherited, it is literally 192 million forecasted deficit. But we're also cognizant of the fact that many public servants are working tirelessly with a lot of vacancies. And what I said to the DG is that if we can beat that deficit considerably, and when all of this is done at the end of the year, we'd very much like to at least stick in maybe even a half a month's salary or a month's salary somewhere for all the public servants who have really stepped up to the plate, because I can tell you they have been working extremely hard. We are near long hours. We see them working. The men and women in uniform are doing an exceptional job. And so we would like for that period between December and January, where you get an early pay in December and that late pay in January, to maybe stick something there to say, thank you very much for all that you have done. But again, that's going to be dependent on our cash position and our finance position. But if we can hold the line that we're holding now and still remain very tight on expenses, and again, that's coming at a considerable cost to many people because of vacancies and so forth, we would really like to say, thank you very much. I think the country owes them that much. So we more than likely is going to end up still in a deficit position, but hopefully it's not as worse. And then that will give us a good cushion going into 2022 in terms of where we can start. But ideally, we want to make sure that by the end of the SPS period of 2024, which is the next 3 years, beginning next year, that we have returned the country back into a surplus position and that we are fully compliant with the FFR. So that is a goal that the government has actually set.
Okay, thank you for that. So when you made the announcement of the 5-day reduction, Premier, the questions started coming about people who are already in quarantine or who just got in. Would they get that special privilege, or is it only, it's going to be maintained from the Wednesday? And also, what about people who are coming in, say, Tuesday? What happens in cases with them?
Well, I certainly sympathize with their views and their feelings, but the position is that it is going to be effective from that date going forward. So, as in the past, when there have been changes, it is from that day going forward. Unfortunately, those who are already in quarantine will serve out the full quarantine period. It's obviously there are a number of good reasons for it, but that's how we have typically done it, and I think that's the way we want to move forward.
Remember also, that under the new regulations, I think we bring back in the pre-arrival PCR, so that would have given an added. So those that would have come in would not have actually done the pre-arrival PCR. So technically, they wouldn't have technically qualified.
Okay. I also got questions coming in from parents who are vaccinated and their kids are not. What's going to happen with them? They're still going to have to do the full 14-day quarantining with their children, or?
The position has been quite clear for some time that is the case. Mm-hmm. Anybody who is in the same household with an unvaccinated person is treated. They're all treated as unvaccinated.
Okay, I can say it, but they wouldn't listen to me. They need to hear you say it. Continuing with the approved vaccines and the new regulations or the changes that are coming, what are the approved vaccines that you're looking for? I guess this would be a Dr. Lee thing.
Yes.
I don't remember if he gave the specifics, but
the approved vaccines are currently the Janssen, Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. The AstraZeneca from any of the different manufacturers.
Okay. And just since I have you by the podium, I know you talked about the verification process and it's going to take some time and doing and so forth. But when it comes to the penalties for breaches and fraudulent certificates and training and so forth, who will be doing all these things? Is it going to be a separate entity, or is it going to be the same Customs and Border personnel at the airport?
The regulations have not yet been put into law or written, so when they are, the details will come out in due course. I would imagine at the moment, just like any other verification of documents, the border force would be an appropriate place to do a check. Whether there is a check before people board or not will come out in due course, and we'll know that information.
Okay. So, in the Premier's speech, he mentioned new medical information that came out that delayed the press briefing that would have given us all this information. What was that new?
I mean, it relates essentially to the Delta variant. Everybody around the world is very concerned about the increased transmissibility of the Delta variant, the fact that it seems to be affecting younger groups of people. And there was key information that we were looking for about the efficacy of the vaccines. You will be maybe aware that it's been announced how good the Pfizer vaccine in particular is against the Delta variant. And so we're very lucky in that regard that we have that. And it was that piece of information in particular that I was very reassured to have.
Now, we started variant testing or genomic sequencing here. Can you share any information on how that has been going? How many tests?
It is still in its infancy in that the lab is still needing to work out its workflow and processes. It's a very time-intensive process. I know that on 2 occasions already, scientists have been working into the early hours of the morning, which is not an acceptable way or not a sustainable way of providing results. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen at a routine basis. We have picked up a number of different variants to date. I'm going to hazard a guess it's about 5, I think. The UK variant, certainly one variant that's called the New York variant, which is not a variant of concern, it was just a variant that we've seen. I think it might be a variant of interest, but it's not a variant of concern. 2 related South African variants and one other, I believe. But not yet the Delta variant. If that happened, I mean, clearly it would be very newsworthy. We are looking to do genomic sequencing on all the positives that we have. We have the capacity to do that, but we just need to give them a little bit of space to get their processes correct so that we can make sure that that happens. But it's not going to be a daily report at all. It is something that we will receive on a weekly basis. We upload that data so that the world can see how the variants of COVID are spreading around the world to a system called GISAID, originally developed for influenza, now being used for SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, so given all the mapping out that we've had from the Premier and the possibility of the introduction of the Delta variant or these other variants, how does that factor into your advice moving forward? Is that how are you going to?
So that's certainly factoring into the advice. It is the reason why we are. I mean, it's the reason why we changed TAC in December. It's exactly because the variants came out, and it's the reason why we're being cautious and looking at what happens as we move forward, and we'll continue to be cautious. We would be in a great position if we never had to take a backward step, but we always have to recognize that we might at some point have to take a backward step. We hope not to.
So is that then why we just have a mid-September projection and not a specific date?
I would say yes to that because we can't. None of us can see into the future. But
I will rely on your advice, sir. I'm going to say yes as well.
Yeah, so none of us can see into the future, and if we could, I mean, people always want science to be exact, and it never is exact. It gives us likelihoods rather than exactitudes, almost inevitably.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. My final question, because I see Donna, like, hurry up. Given that the frontline workers are now are going to be facing the introduction of a possible increased interactions. Would government be considering the introduction of hazard pay for these employees?
That's something we'd have to consider. I'm not sure that it has been done previously, but that's a conversation that we would have with the governor and deputy governor.
Thank you very much. Reshma, Sandra from CMR.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Just three very brief and quick questions. I believe the first one is for the Honourable Minister Kenneth Bryan. Regarding this tourism stipend, there have been a lot of concerns. I've received numerous messages over the last couple of days that it still hasn't been paid for this particular month. And the question, I suppose, is when is it going to be paid for the month of June? And then going forward with the extension, is there anything that the civil service can do to ensure that payments are done in a timely manner?
Consistent. Thank you, Sandra. In respect to the first part of your question, I know there are some concerns. I've been getting some texts. I spoke with the finance team. We've been having some technical difficulties the earlier part of the afternoon. I was promised that it would be resolved before day's end. So depending on which provider, which banking facility, banking entity you're with, you may get it this evening after 5. You may get it tomorrow evening. It depends on which bank you're with. So I do apologize for any delays. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a set date like we normally would do for government paydays outlined. I've discussed that with my ministry in respect to trying to set that up, but obviously the very first one will not be the case because we have to go to Parliament to approve in Finance Committee the additional 27.5 million for the stipend. Until that is approved, I suspect that the first one will be delayed again, but after that I can give a little bit more surety to those who are receiving it to have it in a better timely manner, because I know people have to prepare their lives and the like. So for now, I do apologize this month. I hope that it will be all sorted by tomorrow morning. Everybody will have their money. In respect to July, is dependent upon parliamentary process. After that, moving forward, I will ensure that it's done in a timely manner.
Okay, and one other related question to stipend. Has there been any consideration for providing the musicians another go at any stipend money?
We have not discussed that, but I will sit with the government and discuss that with the Minister of Culture, which will fall under him. We do suspect that there's going to be more concerns as we are getting further away. People were expecting the 70% on the 65,000 to be something really close, and as you heard, that's put a little delay. So we're probably going to have some more discussions, and I'll have to advocate on behalf of the industry. But bearing in mind, we don't have a lot of money. We are still in a deficit, and we are trying our endeavor best to balance the concerns of the people with the available monies that we don't have. And if you recognize how I said that, that we don't have. So we're trying our endeavor best. That's why I'm surprised when people think that we don't want to open. The sooner we open, the less money we will have to spend and put ourselves further in debt. So I hope the public understands that we are trying our endeavor best to do this as quickly as possible, but most importantly, as safely as possible.
Right, and the final question, which I believe is probably for Dr. Lee, was submitted about how many fully vaccinated arriving passengers have tested positive for COVID-19 upon arrival at the end of quarantine.
Mm-hmm. So, you just asked a question for on arrival and at the end of quarantine.
Yes, that's how the question was actually said.
Well, anyway, it's an easy answer because I don't know whether it was on arrival or at the end of quarantine.
Right.
But we've detected 5 people who have been vaccinated who have tested positive at some point. I'm pretty sure the last 2 or 3 were on arrival, but I cannot promise. I don't have that figure in my head. 3 of them were vaccinated at HSA. 1 was Moderna and 2 were from Vericell, which is a Chinese vaccine.
Thank you. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much. And to all of the public that's listening out there that had a ton of questions, I will personally try and get some answers for you after the press briefing is over. Any final words from the panelists?
Yes, I just want to take this opportunity to, in closing from my ministry, to say apologies to any delays with anything in respect to my ministry. We're all new members of government, and I know the public is anxious all the time. But I want you to know that we are committed to doing it the right way the first time. So hope that you can give us a little bit more patience in respect to coming out soon.
Okay. Thank you
So
very much.
I just want to just add, for the businesses that are in the tourism sector, especially the small Caymanian businesses, there are a series of packages that we are working on that will actually help those businesses. Like we said, we do recognize it's gone on for quite some time, and many of them are struggling. And we're not talking about like a loan program or anything like that, something that can tangibly, visibly assist them. So I think more than likely the announcement may either come from Minister Bryan or maybe Minister Andre Ebanks in terms of what it is that we may be looking to do. But they can rest assured that it's something that we are looking at and taking very seriously.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to the public and, of course, to the media for joining us today, and, of course, to our panelists for sharing much desired news today with us. Remember, you can go online to gov.ky or hsa.ky for more COVID-related information as we begin the vaccination process again tomorrow, June the 17th. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.